Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia daf Yutet. Today's daf is sponsored by Ali Alperovich in loving memory of her grandmother, Frima Asalevich, who passed away this week, a month shy of her 98th birthday. Okay, we're going to get started now with a review of what we were up to. We had a Mishna. Okay, we'll go back to the Mishna for a quick minute. It's on Yud Chen Amud Aleph. If you find a get of a woman, or a Shiur of an Eved, emancipation document of a slave, or a deyatike, which are wills, or matana, or a gift, or again, a will is not blah, blah, blah. It's more like a document that says, I'm giving this as a gift to you when you die, when I die. Sorry, someone says, I'm giving you this gift when I die, and it's a document that says, this is my gift when this person dies and the person's dead. So, does this work? Or the person isn't dead yet, but maybe wants to say it's really, I gave it to you already. Or matana, or a gift, a regular gift, or a shovar, or a receipt. Hareze lo yachzir. We don't give it back. Why? Because the concern is that maybe the person decided to write you a get, write you an emancipation document, write you the gift, write you the gift as a will when they die, but change their mind about it. Which implies, if you remember though, that if the person said, but actually I gave it to them, we give it back. So as we did yesterday, and we're going to continue to do today, there seem to be contradictory sources about this, or perhaps there's issues with this. And why isn't this an issue? Okay. And we'll get to that. So what we ended with was, we brought actually not a contradiction from our Mishna, but you could have brought it from our Mishna, and we had that whole discussion. Rabbi Zevid brought it, instead of the inference from our Mishna, he brought the contradiction from a different braita. Okay. He said that there's a Mishna. We already saw there was a Mishna in Gitin, which said that you can't reuse a get. If the get was lost, you can't use it. You can't say it was a valid get. And yet, in the Tosefta, okay, it's the Tosefta in Bava Metzia, the first chapter, Tosefta number 5, it says, Matzah geti shabashuk. If the Baal is modef, the Baal says, the husband says, this was her get, you can give it to her. So we basically have this contradiction, because in Gitin, you can't give it back to her because maybe it wasn't really their get. Maybe he thinks it's their get, but it might not be, because it could be there's two people with the same name in the city. So we resolve this in a bunch of different ways. First, we saw Raba and Rabbi Zevid, who maybe say the same thing or maybe don't say the same thing, whether it's Shiur, Metziot, and you have to have two people name Yosef and Shimon in the city with the same names of their wives and all that, or not. Okay, so, or maybe just one is, maybe just Shiur, Metziot is enough to say we can't return it. Then we had two other answers. Rabbi Abba said maybe there were witnesses that said, oh, we were the witnesses on this document and we know we didn't sign for anybody else. And you don't have to worry that maybe the witnesses also had the same names and it was someone else's document. Or Rav Ashi, who said maybe the husband gave a siman. He said an identifying mark. There was a hole in the get next to this particular letter, and that would work. Now, why did Rav Ashi need it to be a hole in this particular next to this particular letter? Why wasn't enough to say, right, a basic siman would be there's a hole in the document. It's not like all documents have holes in them, right? Maybe yes, maybe no. Okay, if you remember the thing about not putting your Sifrei Torah and all that next to not putting the Truma in the Aron Kodesh because the mice will eat the documents. But anyway, the Gemara says the fact that he needed it to be so specific tells us, we're starting here, second to last line from yesterday's daf. Rav Ashi Rav Ashi wasn't sure if getting back an object using a siman, okay, what we usually talk about, you lose some item, you say, oh, well, it had, this scratch on it, it had this, whatever on it. Is that a Torah law or a rabbinic law? No. If it's a rabbinic law, then when it has Torah ramifications, we're not going to allow it. So if getting back your object with simanim is a rabbinic law, then how could we return the get based on the fact that the husband gave identifying marks that were only rabbinic in nature to allow this woman to now prove she is divorced by Torah law? That won't work. And that's why he said it has to be a very specific siman. We call it a siman muvhak, a very clear identifying mark. Because even if you say that simanim are rabbinic, at least you would allow a siman muvhak on a Torah level. And that's why he said in this case, since he wasn't sure, it's not like we're going to get to this whole machloket, simanim d'oraita or d'Rabbanan in the second chapter. But right now, we're just going to mention it, that there's a machloket about it. He wasn't sure which way we hold. And therefore, he said, let's be stringent here and only allow the husband to get it back with a real clear siman. Rabbi Abba Hanna. Now we're going to have a story about a lost get. Okay, we have Rabbi Abba Hanna, who is a shaliach to bring a get. Husband said, bring this get to my wife. He goes to the Beit Midrash, maybe was busy with his learning, and Irkas Legita Beit Midrash, and he loses the get in the Beit Midrash. Amar isimani itle begavai, tviut aina itle begavai. He says, listen, I could either give you a siman, now not a siman muvhak. I could give you a siman. Why I know this is it. In other words, they obviously found the get. And he said, I could get it back either by giving you a siman or tviut aina. I can look at it and I could tell you if that's the get I had or not, just by visual recognition, which we learned. We allow that for Talmidei Chachamim, for Torah scholars, because Torah scholars, we don't assume that, or we're going to learn this, we don't assume that they're lying. We have a certain amount of confidence in Torah scholars that we allow them, even though other people we don't allow, we allow Torah scholars to look at something and say, oh, by looking at it, I could tell. Usually when you do simanim, you don't let the person see it because you think they're going to lie and say, oh, once they look at it, oh yeah, there's a little crack on the side, and get it back. So he said both. And on the basis of what he said, they gave it back to him. Mamal, lo yadana, but then he said, and this is always the problem, it wasn't a controlled experiment. He should have said one and seen their reaction. And then if that didn't work, use the other. But at this point, he has no idea why they gave it back to him. Was it the simanim or was it the tviut ayin? Now, what's the relevance? So he says, Amar lo yadani mishum siman adurani alei. Because of simanim deoraita, did they give it back to me by simanim, which would show that they held that simanim were by Torah law, which means that we could use it. You know, anyone can give a siman, even if it's not a siman muvhak, like Rav Ashi talked about. Or imishum tviut aina adurani, or maybe because I was a Talmid Chacham. And because of that, they let me look at it and identify based on looking at it. And on that basis, they gave it back to me. But then you would only learn daf gatzur v'mei Rabbanit. Aval inishta amalo, you wouldn't let other people do this. So he didn't know, and basically we're left with, we don't really know what the answer is. Like, we have this situation, but we don't know what we would do in other situations. That was the first part of the daf. Now we're going to go back to similar type things we did yesterday, and we're going to do this throughout the rest of the cases in the Mishna. So what we're going to do is, it's a little bit different, but we're going to take now Gufa. We're going to go back. Right now we're quoting the Tosefta that we quoted yesterday. Matzah get isha bashuk. This is the one Rabbi Zevid brought. You find a get of a woman in a shuk. The husband says, it's my wife's get, you can give it to her. If not, then you don't. You don't give it to her, you don't give it to him. So bizman shabal modeh, what's going to concern us right now is the fact that if the husband admits, you can give it back to the woman. But why? Now, here we're going to get into a different problem. Forget about get lishma. If you remember, and I know this was hard stuff to go back to, but we're going to go back to it, which is, if you remember, what did we have? We had this case of, on Daf Yud, we had a Mishna. We find a shtarchov, a promissory note in the street. And even if, remember, we had different opinions there, we can't give it back to the malveh, to the creditor, but then, because then the creditor will collect, right? But we said there was a debate, what if the loveh admits and says, oh, but I actually still owe the money. Do we give it back or not? Now, the first opinion we read said that we don't give it back. Even if the loveh admits, why not? What are we worried about? A kanunya. Remember the conspiracy? We're worried, actually, well, the truth is that's one option, but yeah, that's not even the one we're going to talk about. I just realized we're going to get to kanunyas later today, all sorts of kanunyas, but conspiracies. But what we're worried really is that the loveh admits that this was a loan, but he doesn't remember the dates. And maybe the date in the document was Nisan, and it wasn't actually given until 6 months later. And then when we give back the document to the malveh, he'll be able to take land that the borrower sold from Nisan, the date in the document, when that's not the case, because the loan was only taken 6 months later in Tishrei. And therefore, the malveh, the borrower, the creditor who now has the document in hand will go take money from people that he shouldn't be allowed to take from, because the property of the loveh is only liened when the loveh actually takes the loan. If the loan was taken 6 months later, returning this document will cause problems, and we don't return it. So now we're going to say that in this case, we seem to have the same problem. Why? Now, you think of a get of a woman as not a financial document. The get of a woman is a document that says the woman's divorced, right? And it's a document that primarily permits her to get remarried. But it also has financial ramifications. Why is that? You might remember that a woman who gets, when she's married, her property, anything she came into the marriage with, or anything she inherits while she's married, the principle of it, the body of it, is owned by the husband, is owned by her, but the proceeds are all the husband's. So we're going to call that payroad. Anything that her fields produce, the husband gets and can sell them to other people. Now, when she gets divorced, she gets the payroad. So the date on the divorce document is super critical because she can go to people he sold payroad to and say, hey, those are mine. He sold them after the divorce. So if there's a problem with the date in the divorce, which again, you find it on the street, we have no idea when the get was given. So the Gemara says, how can we return the get to the wife if the husband agrees? Lichush, maybe we have to worry that she's doing some monkey business here, and maybe even the two of them together. Shema katav litem b'Nisan. Maybe he wrote it in Nisan, was planning to divorce his wife, but people think about divorce, they go write a divorce document, they hire the sofer, and then they, maybe not, maybe I won't divorce her right now. But lo natan la'ad Tishrei, maybe he didn't give it to her till Tishrei. He sold proceeds of the field to all these people from the time he wrote the get till the time he gave the get. And Mafkaligita, she'll pull out the get. So he sold them fair and square. They were his. But she'll pull out the get to cut to Benisan. She's going to take money away from people against the halacha. So how can we let her take this document back when it has financial ramifications that she could do monkey business with? Well, it really depends on a machloket that we learned in Gittin that you might remember. From what moment does the husband get the payroll? Does the wife go back to getting payroll? If you say, well, one opinion said that as soon as the husband thinks to divorce the wife, and in this case, right, thinking maybe isn't much anything, but writing a get obviously proves that he thought to divorce the wife, already at that point, he loses all rights to the proceeds of her property. So if that's the case, well, then this works perfectly. This is like what we did before with the shtarei akna'ah. If the date in the document is the date of the loan is irrelevant to the document, if it says in the document, it belongs to the malveh. So then we can resolve that problem. Same here. If you hold that, we have no problem. Then Shapir, great. Then she can pull out this document and she's right. It's really hers. But but if you say the husband gets payroll until the moment he gives her the get, then we're going to have a problem. Because returning a get, what are we doing? We're returning a get we found on the ground because the husband says it's my wife's. But we don't know really when he gave it to her. And maybe he didn't give it to her on the date in the get. And then she's going to pull money out from people that bought proceeds and claim they're hers. To which they answer an interesting answer. When this woman goes and produces her get and says, hey, listen, here's my get. It says Nisan. You bought this stuff in ER. Give it back to me. They'll say to her, hey, we don't trust you that the date in your get was the date you got the get. Go prove it. And if she can't prove it, she can't get it. So basically, there's an assumption, and then we're going to have to question, why didn't we say this with the shtar chov, okay? But that's why I say this is interesting, because all of a sudden we pull out of a hat some answer that we could have used earlier, which is what the Gemara is going to ask. Basically, the assumption is she won't be able to get those payroll out of the hands of those people because they'll say to her, go produce proof that you actually got divorced on that day. To which the Gemara says, okay, so Mishna mishtar chov. Why don't we say the same thing with the promissory note? Give the promissory note back to the malva when the lova agrees, because the lova says I didn't pay back. The malva will go to take land, perhaps incorrectly. Who cares? When the burden of that issue lies in the hands of the people who they're going to collect money from, the buyers. The buyers will say, go prove that the loan happened on that day. Ditnan, and now we're just going to go through what we saw there as part of the question. It says in the Mishna on Yubet, and I already reviewed this with you, so this should be easy now. If you find a shtar chov im yesh nechasim lo yachzil, if it's lean to property, then you don't give it back. And ukimna b'shchayav mode, and we said that Mishnah again. There was a difference of opinion here, but there were those who said that it's when the lova admits, and we still don't return it. And why not? Mishum shema kadav lova b'nisan v'lo lava tishrei, because maybe the loan was really only in Tishrei, and it says Nisan. And we're going to take it away from these people against the law. Hatamnami, why don't we say there? Lehander, give it back. Ki'ata the mitraf, give the malva back the shtar. And when the malva goes to collect the money, again, this is all review of what I told you before. We're just reading it inside. Nemale, the buyers will say, the person who bought from the borrower will say, go prove to us when the loan actually happened. When did you actually get this promissory note? Was it in Nisan like it says? Or did you really only do the loan in Tishrei and then the Lova gave you the document, the IOU, only in Tishrei? So go prove it. So why don't we say that? And then we could give all the documents back to the Mamal, and the burden is on the other guy. Again, not that the burden is on the lokach, but the lokach, well, we assume, there's an assumption that the lokach's not just is going to let his property get taken away. He'll say, go prove it. And since if you want to take money out of someone's hands, the burden of proof is on you. If they say go prove it, you have to prove it to get it back. So the malva won't be able to get the land. To which they make a very interesting distinction. And I already kind of alluded to this before. A get serves two purposes. Get's purpose is, number one, to say the woman's divorced, so she could get remarried. Number two, for the pay road. If you hold that mishat netina, right, then, or whatever. Either way, the get can be used as a proof. It doesn't matter which one, actually. Get can be used as a proof, I'm divorced, and therefore the pay road are mine. A promissory note has one purpose only. What's the difference between taking a loan with a promissory note, without a promissory note? That without a promissory note, you can't take land from other people. But, right, there's no liened property. But if it's a document, a written document, the whole purpose of the written document is the malveh can now take the money. If the lova doesn't have money, can seize land that the lova sold from the time of the loan. So that's going to be a big difference. Okay, and now we're going to see why. Amre, we say the following. Now, this is all about what we assume people will do. When a woman produces her get and goes to demand payroll back from people who bought from the husband, they'll say to her, they're going to be toveota and say, go prove it. Why? Because Amar, in other words, what's the worst case scenario? That really the get wasn't given on the right day, right? And the rabbis anyway let her have it, okay? Even though the get wasn't really given on the day it was written. Amar, Rabbanan say, listen, the fact that the rabbis gave it back to her, why did they give her back this star? Well, because what's the real purpose of the star? Mishum shelo ta'agim b'teitav. We don't want this woman to be an aguna. We don't want her to sit not being able to get remarried. So even though she lost her get and, it was found on the street, the rabbis say give it back to this woman to allow her to remarry. That is a big, important value in Judaism, not to have a woman as an aguna. So therefore, in other words, the rabbis theoretically will give this star back to a woman because it's not really a collection document. It's really to prove that the woman's divorced so she can get remarried. That we're going to give it to her. The rabbis are going to say, listen, this was lost. It was found. Maybe the date's not right. Let's give it back to the woman anyway, because we don't want to keep her as an aguna. If we say, sorry, can't give it back, and your get maybe was given a different day, even though your husband says this was your get, maybe it was given a different day. Oh, who's to say the husband's going to give her another get? And then she'll be stuck. She'll be an aguna. We don't want that to happen. So even if the date is off, they'll give it back to her. And that's why when they actually end up, when she pulls it out, they're going to say, we understand the rabbis gave it back to you. Let's say, worst case scenario, this was lost and found and they gave it back to you. But prove to me that you actually got the divorce on that day, because this isn't necessarily centrally meant to, right? The main purpose of it is not to collect money, but not the same as the shtarchov. The lokech is not going to be able to collect it. Is not going to start questioning. Why won't they question? And again, this is in terms of what we expect people to think about and what they would be worried about. What will they say in their minds? The fact that the rabbis returned this to the malveh, they'll assume what? That the rabbis did their homework. Pshita, right? It's obvious to us. For what purpose did they return this document? For collection purposes, because that's the only purpose that the malveh can now go collect the loan. The creditor can collect it from people that the borrower sold land to. Limitrafu, to seize property, lien property. Shma mina, kama Rabbanan b'milta. It must be the rabbis checked into the date. Otherwise, they would be returning a document that has no purpose other than to collect incorrectly. Umakami didima tashar liyadin. It must be that the shtar actually got to the malveh before I bought the lamb from the loveh. In other words, if the date is Nisan and I bought an Iyar, it must be that he actually got the document in Nisan, because otherwise the rabbis never would have given it back. And that's why the buyers aren't going to question. And since the buyers won't question, the Mishna says, well, don't give it back to the malveh unless you check the date. And if you don't know the right date, don't give it back. So that's the difference between the two. Now we're going to move on to shiur avadim. So we finished with get. We're moving on to emancipation of a slave. And again, we're going to bring a braita that says the following. Matzah shtar shiur bashuk. Okay, sorry, Tanu Rabbanan, a braita is quoted. Matzah shtar shiur bashuk. If we find an emancipation document in the shuk, bizman sha'arav modeh, yachzir la'eved. Now, this is the same as the Tosefta said about get, and it's the same as the inference of our Mishna. But here it says it explicitly. If the master admits that he freed the slave, right, then we can return it to the slave. But if the owner doesn't admit, then we don't return it. Now, let's go back to the first line. And we're going to ask the exact same question we just asked about the woman. There also could be monkey business going on here. Why? Because again, let's talk about an eved outside before we read it inside. In eved, what do we say? Anything the eved buys, slave, a Canaanite slave, yad eved ki yad rabo. It goes straight to the master. But once they're free, it's their own. So here's our scenario. So the Gemara first says, let's just focus on the line that's important to us. Bizman sha'arav modeh miyad yachzir la'eved. The master agrees that he gave this emancipation document to the slave. We give it back. Now, aren't we worried about dates again? What would be the problem here? Same thing. Maybe the emancipation document says Nisan, but he didn't give it till 6 months later in Tishrei. He went in ER, bought property, or bought anything. What happens to what the eved buys? Goes to the master. And in fact, since he wasn't really freed, it went to the master. So the master took the property. You have to think about it like this. He didn't act as a shaliach of, it's not like he wrote a deed that said, I'm buying this item. So it was in the slave's name. But anything in the slave's name goes straight to their master. So it was owned by the master. The master went and sold it in Sivan, let's say next month. And now comes the evidence, says, hey, I have an emancipation document from Nisan. He goes to the people who bought the property from the master, and says, hey, look, this is mine. He had no right to sell it to you. When it's not true. He did because the date said Nisan, but it wasn't given until 6 months later. So now it's going to a little bit depend on whether you hold that it's good for a slave to be freed or it's bad to a slave to be freed. And this is a machloket. You actually saw it in Gittin. Is it good for a slave to be freed? Well, it's good because number one, they're a free person. They're Jewish now, right? And it's their money is their own, right? That's a good thing. On the other hand, they can't marry a shivcha k'na'anit anymore, which some people say that's bad because shivcha k'na'anit is sort of hefker, like it's more like they can be with any shivcha k'na'anit they want. It's more of like a loose kind of life. And if they were working for a Jew, for a Kohen, they got to eat truma. And now that they're freed, they're a regular Jew, they're not a Kohen, they can't eat truma anymore. So there's certain good things about it, there's certain negative things about it. And because of that, there's this debate. Do we view it as a zchut? Do we view it as a chov? So why is that relevant? Well, if you'd say it's a zchut, now we're going to have another thing that we saw not so many dapim back in the sugya on the shtar chov. Abaye said that when Eidim sign on a shtar, if it's good for the person, it's effective immediately. This is like the shtarei hakna'ah, that even though the loan didn't happen, since the Eidim signed, right, they made the loan happen right now, right? And the truth is, Abaye even says it's not even shtar kna'ah, it's any shtar. Once the Eidim signed, it's a done deal, even if it didn't really happen yet. Like the nechasim, the property is already, mishuabad is already, right, liened. Same thing here. Once he signs, and the Eidim sign on this document of manumission, the emancipation document, basically, he has his freedom. So then it doesn't matter. Shapir, this works perfectly. This is just like the woman. If you say once the husband writes the get, already the payroll go to her, and that will work perfectly. There wouldn't be a problem. But if you view it as a chov, it's a bad thing for him. How can you explain it? So now, how do you explain it? Same way as the woman. They're going to say the same thing to the slave, because the truth is, the shiur document of a slave is like the get of a woman. It has two purposes. The main purpose is to show he's Jewish and he's free and he's not his master's slave anymore. That's the main purpose. It also has some ramifications in other areas, in financial areas. So that's why when they get to the lekuchot and they claim this is mine, those lekuchot are going to be smart enough to say, well, I agree that you're free, but I don't trust you about the date. Go prove it. Okay, whereas again, they're not going to do that with a shtar chov, because the only purpose of a shtar chov is to collect the lien property. Now we're moving on to the next topic, daitike, okay, or diatike, matana, and tanu rabbanan. So first they want to know, ezu diatike, what does this mean? Da tehe lemekamuliyot, and that's what we call a notrikon. It's taking the word, the letters, right, the letters of the word, and saying it's abbreviated form of this statement, which is, this should be established and will be done, which basically means a will, okay? I'm giving you this gift for when I die. You're establishing something for the future that will be. She'im meit nechasav leploni, that if he dies, she dies, then the property will go to a certain person. That's what that is. Matana, what's a matana then? Kol shekatuv bo behayom ula'achar mita. Now this is a bit of a strange statement, because what they sounds like they're saying, and the Gemara is going to immediately say, no, that's not what we meant. But it sounds like what they're saying, what is a gift? A gift is when I give you a document that says, this will be yours from today and after my death. Okay, that's a bit of a strange thing. What does that mean? What it means is a gift is when I give you the rights to the body of the land, okay, meaning this land will be yours when I die. It's yours today, but really only yours when I die. What does that mean? It means right now I'm giving you the body of the land. Okay, what does that mean? It means you own the property, but as long as I'm alive, I'm going to take all the proceeds of this land. But when I die, you'll get everything. So basically, the body of it is yours, but I have the payroll. We've seen this before. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute. Are you saying any gift has to be written in this language? If I want to give you a gift, I have to write What if I want to give you the proceeds now? I want to give you everything. I can't do that. That's a weird thing. To which Amar Abai hachi kamardo. You misread this source. What this source meant was, when do you give a gift when you're healthy and well that's not written as a will, but it's like a will, basically, okay? And that's this language. If you use the language, this is yours, mehayom alachar mita, and you're not on your deathbed, what you're basically saying is, I'm giving this to you when I die. And I'll, again, the body of it is yours, but I'll keep the proceeds till I die. And then it's really not acquired by the person fully till after death. Okay, that's an aside. Koshka chubo mehayom, right? So what is that? Koshka chubo mehayom ulachar mita. So if you write it with those words, then that basically is just like a diatike, basically. Okay, now we're going to get to a little bit more complicated sugya, although it's not so complicated, it's just very long-winded, and we're going to see some interesting things about it. So again, what does our Mishna say? Matana, dayatike, we don't return. Why don't we return it? Because maybe they never really gave it. Maybe they thought to give it as a gift. They thought to give it as an inheritance, but they changed their mind at the end. Now, Talmud de lo martnu, martnu. So that would only be because maybe they changed their mind. But you can infer from here that if someone actually said, they found it on the street, and the giver of the gift said, oh yeah, okay, let's go back to Ruth and Naomi. Ruth gave it as a gift to Naomi according to the shtar. And we find it on the street. And Ruth says, yeah, I gave it to Naomi. Okay, so we give it to Naomi, right? Seems reasonable. Uriminu, but that contradicts the following source. We keep doing the same thing over and over. We have either the problem of, right, this penunia, we're worried people are going to misuse or abuse, right? And then they seem to have other sources that say, oh, we're not worried about that at all. So matzah diatikot, apotikaot, umatanot. Okay, apotiki, we're not going to get into this, but that we've seen before. It's when the malva says, the love says to the malva, the borrower says to the creditor, when you collect the loan, you're going to collect it from this land only. And then, subsequently sold it. And again, maybe the dates are off. All those cases, if we find that on the ground, even though both sides agree that I gave the gift, I gave the apotiki, I gave I bequeathed it to you in my will. Nobody gets it. So now we're going to have to try to figure out why. We're going to have two answers. Okay, Rabbi Abba bar Mamal is going to answer by the following way. And there's a major problem with what he says. Okay, but he says the following. Amarle habibari habishchimera. One was written by a healthy person as a healthy person's gift, and one was a shchimera, a person on their deathbed or inheritance document. Now, what's the difference? Now, what's the problem? The problem is obvious. Both sources use the language of diatike, which we know is a will. So you can't say one was a gift of a will and one was not a gift of a will because both say diatike, and that's why the second answer is going to reject this. But let's understand his answer first, and that's going to take us through most of Amud Bet. Matnitin dikatane ha martnu notnim b'shchib mera debar mahadru. Okay, now they're going to explain this. Now, sometimes the Gemara says, this is this way, this is that way, and kind of leaves it to you to understand. In this case, the Gemara is going to go through a very long explanation of which is which and why. And what I want to, before we even read this, and this is the very interesting part of today's stuff, I want to read you a line in the Ritva. I could have read it in the Ramban. I chose the Ritva, but the Ramban actually preceded the Ritva by 100 years, and therefore probably should have read it in there, but had the Ritva more easily accessible, so I just pulled it off my shelf, and I'm going to read it to you. The Ritva says, and I remember learning this in university, and it's a wow statement, and it's fun when you get to something you say, I remember learning this. So it says here, Kam bebari kam b'shchid mera, perush matnitim b'shchid mera, braita bebari. So that's the next line, right, where they explain. Okay, there's bari, there's shchid mera, this one is this, and they start to explain, and you'll see, okay, and it's very long. And then it says, v'hakol hu milashon Rav Yehudai Gaonza. Let's go through some history. I know we don't have a lot of time, but this is super interesting and important. The Gemara was written, Amoraim lived, okay, between the years of 200 and 500. Then we have the Kufa, the next stage is called the Sforaim, who lived from around 500 to, or a little after 500 to 800. Then you have the Geonim, who lived from 800 to 1,000. Now, our Gemara is made up of primarily Amoraitic material and Savoraitic material that was kind of added as notes and then or ultimately got incorporated into the Gemara. So when we say Rabina, Rav Ashi, or Sofa, Ra'ah, they ended the Gemara time period. That was around the year 500, but give or take. But that was just one part of the Gemara. Then there was a whole other layer of Sforaim, which was added later. And those are people who are called Stamaim. They come without names, right? All the Amoraim were living earlier, but then we have all these long-winded discussions. But there's a few places, and this is possibly indicative that there's more than just a few, where the Rishonim say, this is Gaonic material. This whole sugya, you're going to see the difference, okay? When you see it, you'll see. It's much more like a commentary, explaining what on earth is going on here. And that's why it's going to be very long, because commentaries in general had a lot more words than the Gemara did. And here you have the Ramban who first admits it. Then, about 100 years later, within the same Spain, they're like students of, comes the Ritva, and they basically say, this is Rav Yehudai Gaon. Now, perhaps their text even said that Rav Yehudai Gaon said this, and then it got added into the text of the Gemara. So it's very interesting in terms of the development of the Gemara. Okay, we're going to have to stop here and go on and learn the content, but super interesting. So now they say the following. Why? Now, the basic difference between a manshchiv mera and a regular gift is the following. This is the basis for what we're going to learn. Okay, it's not so complicated. It's just there's a lot of long-winded wording. So when you give a gift, as soon as I give the gift, it's valid. I can't change my mind about it. If I give you a gift today, I can't take it back tomorrow. Okay? It's yours. 100% you have legal rights to it. But if I give you I say to you, when I die, right? How many times do people redo their wills? You can redo your will as much as you want until you die. Okay, as long as you haven't died yet, you can change it. Once you're dead, it's too late, but you can change it. So that's a big difference. And that's what they say here. Sorry, debar mahadr, because shchid mera, you can change your mind. And that's why we still don't have any idea why this is. So let's see. Why do we give it back? When you find this matnat shchid mera on the street, okay, the rabbis find it, and Ruth claims, oh yeah, I gave this to Naomi 10 years ago. We can give it back to her. Why? Okay, we're going to go with years. The document says 2020, 2014, okay? Now, we're sitting in 2024. What's the worst case scenario? Maybe Ruth wrote it to Naomi in 2014 and decided not to give it to her. Now, then, okay, if she decided not to give it to her and now gives it to her, it says, oh yeah, I gave this to Naomi. Let's say she didn't really give it to Naomi, she gives it to Naomi now. Okay, so it's Naomi's now. What's the difference if it says 2014? Well, the difference is that maybe in the interim, Ruth gave it as a gift to somebody else. Well, in other words, first Ruth wanted to give it as a gift to Naomi. So she wrote her a document, but then decided not to give it. Then she gave it to David as a gift, in 2024. And now we're standing in 2024 after the date she gave it to David. Let's say, in other words, again, this is all theoretical. This is when they see the document on the ground. Ruth says, give it to Naomi. We have to start thinking about what all the possibilities are. So if she gave it to David in 2024, and now she wants to give back this document to Naomi in 2014, well, let's think about it. If it's a man, not okay? So maybe she's really trying to give it to Naomi because she wants to give it to her at this earlier date, and she wants to take it away from David. She regrets that she gave a gift to David and wants to give it to Naomi. Now, already we said Naomi's gift is a shchivmera. Ruth gave it to her and said, when I die, this will be yours. So, now she wants to undo the gift that she gave to David. Now, there's two possibilities. It really doesn't make a difference which one. Was David's a shchivmera or a regular gift? If the gift to David was a regular gift and not a shchivmera, well, if we give back the document to Ruth from 10 years earlier, there's nothing, we're not going to be able to get the land away from David. Why? If both of them go to court and pull out, and Naomi says, oh, look, Ruth promised me that when she dies, this will be mine, and she promised me in 2014. David pulls out and says, well, in 2024, she gave me a gift, mine. So what date are we going to go by? Of course, David's going to win because we already said Ruth can change her mind about her will 10 times. If she, in the meantime, gives it as a gift to someone, whatever she promised to Naomi is irrelevant. So if we give the star back to Naomi and Ruth had already gifted it to David, well, David will get it anyway. So it's not going to cause any problems. And even if she gave it to David as a will, it doesn't matter either. Because again, even if we give it back to Naomi, there still won't be a hefsed, because if Naomi comes into court and says in 2014, Ruth promised me that when she dies, I'll get it, and David says, well, in 2024, she promised me I'll get it, obviously David's going to win out. So if David really exists, it won't matter. We can give it back to Naomi because Naomi will never win in court. That's assuming, right, that Naomi's was a shchivmera, only if it was a gift that you can change, right? Now you get where we're going, right? Because obviously if she gave it to David later, she was undoing what she gave to Naomi. But braita, when the braita says, but the case where you can't change your mind at all, we don't give it back. If Ruth says, I gave this to Naomi in 2014, we definitely don't give it back to Naomi because there we're worried about monkey business. Because the gift from Ruth to Naomi in 2014, if it didn't really happen, and now Naomi comes into court with that gift, if it's a gift that Ruth gave her when she was healthy and it wasn't I'm going to give this to you when I die, then it's Naomi's immediately from the date of the gift. And maybe it's not really. So again, what do we have to be concerned? Dilma katva lahai mi'ikara, right? The Gemara doesn't even need to go through all this. And that's why, again, this is the Gaonim adding. Maybe she wrote this to... Now, by the way, you could see why the Gemara actually added this in, because we never would have come up with this on our own, right? Now, at this point, we could write the rest of the Gemara, but the beginning part we couldn't have written, right? We wouldn't have known. So anyway, Dilma katva lahai mi'ikara, and as I say, the Gemara added in, I mean, whoever printed it, right, said, let's stick this in with the Gemara because the Gemara is incomprehensible without. So, right, imagine they had just said, ha b'bari, ha b'shchivmera. You would have been like, what? What does that have to do with anything? So, Dilma katva lahai mi'ikara v'imlich v'lo yaveh. Right? Again, what's our concern here? Maybe she wrote this gift to Naomi but decided not to give it. Then hadar katva li'ini shachmini v'yavila. Then she gave the land as a gift to David. Then she changed her mind. She didn't want to give it to David. So what'd she say? Look, I gave David a gift already. I can't undo it because it wasn't a will. It was a regular gift. Why don't I just say that I gave this original document to Naomi way back in 2014? And we'll give it back to Naomi, the ktav, the written document. And when Naomi comes with saying, Ruth gave me a gift in 2014, and David comes saying, Ruth gave me a gift in 2024, who's going to win? Obviously Naomi, because once Naomi got the gift, it's hers. So there we're worried about monkey business because maybe she really, again, we found the star on the floor, which makes us think that she never really gave it. So therefore, Ella Amrinanle. So what do we say? Well, this is very smart. We say to Ruth, you want to give this to Naomi? You say this document is Naomi's? Okay, here's your test. We're not giving her that document that's written, that fell on the ground, right, that we found on the ground, because maybe you really never gave it to her. Now, we don't know if David exists or not, right? So what do we say? Right? We don't know, maybe maybe you never gave it to her. And maybe there's some David out there that you gave him this gift to. And you want to change your mind about it. This is just, we're very wordy here. Okay, very verbose, saying really something that we know already, which is that maybe you gave it to David. Now, if you really didn't give it to David, and you're basically saying, give this document to Naomi because I gave it to her. Well, so you really want to give this to Naomi? Great. Write a new document today, date it today's date. Look, if David doesn't exist, so great. Now it's Naomi's from today. Right? Or, right? And she'll get it because it's hers now. And basically, if David exists, sorry, I didn't read that right. If you actually gave it to David, well, you can write it to Naomi now. It's an irrelevant document. She won't get anything. David will come to court and say, oh, my date's earlier. Okay? So that will resolve all our issues, except for the one big problem I mentioned in the beginning, which is if he says one source is a shlimera and one source is a bari, a healthy person giving a gift, but in both sources it said diatikot, which means wills, which are after death, which can be undone. So that doesn't work. Therefore, El Amar Rav Zevid, he gives a different answer. And again, from here, we're going to get into Gaonic material. The Ritva says here also, the Ramban says here also, this is all the explanation of the Gaonic. One is him, one is his son. Okay, so one is Ruth and one is her heirs. So how does this work? So the Mishna, where it says, Ruth says it's Naomi, she can give it, that's in a case where it's her still talking. Now, she's still alive. Debar Mahadarhu, because again, she can change her mind at any point. So therefore, this is just review. If she gave it to David already, well, Naomi's not going to be able to get it from David because Naomi's date is earlier. David's date is later, and Ruth can always change her mind about wills, so we're always going to go with the later date. In court, David will win any day. Dekama ubatra batra zachi. When you have an earlier date and a later date and a shchid mera, you're going to give it to the later. Daha hadrabemi kama, because it shows that Ruth must have changed her mind. Ki katani bebraita, here's the new explanation, and with this we'll end for today. When we say either one, right, can change their mind, even if each one says yes, Ruth says, I gave it to Naomi, we do not give it back. Why? What's the case? Well, bibire. Now, Ruth is no longer alive, and her son says, oh yeah, my mother, Ruth, gave this to Naomi many years ago. Damrina, what's our concern? Dilma maybe his father, which again is Ruth in our case, the mother, gave it to Naomi or wrote it for Naomi, but never really gave it. And it's not really Naomi's at all. Ubatar, and again, we're talking about, she said, when I die, you'll have this. Ubatar avua, and after the father died, after Ruth died in our case, Ruth's son wrote a gift to David. Now, Ruth's son wants to change his mind. And, oh, I don't want to give this to David. Sadvar, and he held the following. Well, what's my option? I can't return it because I gave the gift. Can't undo it. So what can I do? There's this document on the ground that says that my father gave this as a gift to Naomi 10 years ago in the will. Amar, now you see why the will is relevant, because if the gift was given as a will gift, then the son never owned it. If the son never owned it, then the sale to David is irrelevant. And this is why it could be a problem. So, I'll claim that my mother, Ruth, actually gave it to Naomi, even though she didn't, or we don't know that she did, right? And then they'll use the star, and then we'll take it away from David. Right? Because Naomi will get it, because again, if Ruth gave it to Naomi as a gift when she dies, then the son never inherited, and the sale to David was a totally irrelevant sale. And niflog bahadeh, and me, meaning the son and Naomi, will split it 50-50. In other words, we'll pull it away from David and we'll share the proceeds. Hilkach, and therefore, what do we say to him? And this is like the previous. Hey, son of Ruth, no way are you getting this. Because maybe your father wrote this document, or your mother in this case, Ruth wrote it to Naomi and never gave it to her. Again, we don't know that there's a David out there, but maybe the son sold it to someone called David, and doesn't matter what his name is, and you changed your mind about it. So now they say to him, like we did in the previous, if you're really serious and your father really, or your mother, Ruth, gave this as a gift, gave it, go you own the land now. Go, or maybe you didn't, but you can just, if you want Naomi to have it, write her a gift, started dating today. Okay? Because if the father really didn't give it and you really sold it to David, you gave it to David, then nothing's going to go wrong. Because when they go to court, David will pull out the earlier date and it'll be his. Done deal. Okay? So we explained in two ways how you can resolve this contradiction between the will that says you can, you can't, right? Return it or not. In which case are we worried? In which case are we not? Either one's a shchimera, one's a bari, or maybe they're both a bari, shchimera, both on the deathbed or a will kind of document, but one is the son, the concern is that the son sold it, and the other is the concern, it's the person themselves. Person themselves, you can actually return it. Son, you can't. Okay, so what we did today is a quick review. For the most part, we finished up with last sugya of the resolution of Rav Ashi, which talked about simanim, when we had this contradictory sources, and we talked a little bit about simanim. Then after that, and whether simanim are doraita or Rabbanit. Then we got into more contradictions between not talking about get lishma and those problems, but other issues of financial. The whole daf was really about contradictory sources or comparing cases where in some cases we're worried about financial monkey business, in some cases we're not, even though theoretically in all of them it seems like there should be a concern. And then we explain why in some cases there's a concern, in other cases there isn't a concern. And each time we answered according to the situation. The get and the emancipation were similar because we assumed the lekucha will ask and make them prove it versus the shtar chov. And then we got into the wills and we talked about different options with the wills. And with that, we learned this very interesting thing about that some things that we read in the Gemara perhaps are gaonic material that later got into the Gemara, which again means, I think Rav Yehuda, from what I remember, I didn't have a chance to look it up. You can look it up, was one of the earlier gaonim, which makes more sense. Then in the earlier part of the Tkufat gaonim, they were still, right, and this always begs the question of when there's changeover of time periods, and even when you have a changeover, and actually Svarim to Gaonim was pretty clear changeover because the whole Gaonim thing was that there were 3 head Gaonim that were kind of in charge, and it was a whole shift in the way they did things, but still certain things maybe continue where some of their notes ended up in the Gemara as well. It's an interesting thing about the editing of the Gemara in general. With that, wish everybody a good day and b'sorah tova.